can never tell when this thing starts. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining today's weekly hangout of the Dalten Collective. Just gonna share my screen real quick. A window. This one. Excellent. Reset. Cool. All right. So the hypothesis. What are we doing here? What's Dalten Collective all about? Dalten Collective is fundamentally about fellowship and community, first and foremost. People are the most important thing, and that's the thing on top of our list. We want to practice a community that is interested in how you're doing and in what your internal state is, interested in all the things that make us human, and that's the most important thing about the Dalten Collective. One part of being in community, though, is something like sustainability, or we need resources in order to support ourselves. And so this is a for-profit venture. Right? So we have people first, and then we have profit second, or revenue second, however that looks. And this is sort of similar to what you'd normally see in a traditional company, but in a traditional company, they might be very mission-focused or profit-focused. And in that case, if a person doesn't or falls out of a line with that mission, then they leave the organization or they get kicked out, right? So the thing that it does roughly stays the same, and the people come and go. In this group, it's a bit more like the people are the core piece, the mission, and that generally stays the same, but the things that they do change from time to time. Now, those teams that might be formed to create things or create revenue streams might have a similar situation where one person or several people don't align anymore with those particular visions, and they might move teams, or they might come back up to the collective and wait for some other opportunity, but they're still part of the group in general. And the last point about what Dalten is sovereignty, meaning we want to do this on our own terms. And this seems to be a theme that's cropping up in multiple places. And so for today's mood, I'm here in Seattle, and so this is the current state of affairs in Seattle. On Capitol Hill, which is one of the largest neighborhoods in Seattle, there's a little zone right now where the protest movement has sort of occupied an area, and they are calling it a free zone or an autonomous zone. And this is not a new idea. This has happened many times throughout history, where people carve out a space for themselves to do and to govern themselves the way they see fit. And this is just the most recent example of something like this happening. But it is terrestrial, meaning it has the issues of sanitation and water and food and waste disposal and policing and all of the things that come with being physically located together. Now, in sort of a comparison to what Dalten is, we have no terrestrial location. We are completely formed on the internet, which means things like cities were sort of invented such that people can come together in physical proximity to get things done. What we are doing is more like minds coming together to get things done. We don't need physical bodies necessarily to get the work that we want to do accomplished. And that's somewhat different than what we see in the physical world. So things like the free zone on Capitol Hill are going to have the same rough experiences that all terrestrial establishments have, whereas Dalten won't. It'll have a different experience. But roughly, we are concerned about some of the same things, sustainability and sovereignty and things of that nature. I think that moving more in the direction of digital sovereignty and spaces where we can collaborate together is going to have an advantage over things like this, particularly where physical things are in play. There's not that doesn't come into play with the Dalten Collective, and neither is the Dalten Collective overlapping with existing power structures or physical footprints about things. And it also makes it a lot cheaper. We can run the Dalten Collective on nearly nothing. So we've been going now for several months and have almost no expenses. And as soon as we do decide what we want to try to do for revenue, we are likely going to be somewhat profitable, which is something I think is interesting. So that's the mood that I had today. And then today we also have a special guest. And let me just stop sharing my screen here and then turn it over to you. Ori, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then we'll maybe enter into some question and answer about Dalten specifically. Sound good?
Sure.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. I'm Ori, and my background as a developer, got interested in Bitcoin in 2014 and did some research on it undergrad on like incentives in the Tor network using Bitcoin, and then also kind of exploiting the Bitcoin multi-sig script hash to do a pseudo DAO on Bitcoin. That was just some like early playing around, but nowadays I'm more involved in the Ethereum community, specifically the DAO community, and so I'm a founding member of dOrg, which is a Web3 developer collective that runs on Ethereum. We use DAO Stack to govern and then work on various like agency projects as a dev agency. And yeah, so over the last year and a half, we've been kind of learning as we go, figuring out the logistical, operational, legal challenges of running a DAO as a company. And we actually were able to incorporate about a year ago and basically give our DAO limited liability and the ability to contract with other entities. So legal personality for something that was purely smart contract based before the legal construct was instantiated.
That's cool. So you're doing something very similar to what Dalten is attempting to do. We're still very much at the beginning stages of this. But could you kind of walk us through why you did decide to incorporate legally as opposed to just doing something completely with smart contracts?
Yeah, so for a while we were doing open source development and getting paid for it occasionally through a multi-sig, and that was when there was like about 3 people involved. And then as we started getting like more serious projects, we realized, okay, we're gonna have to like declare taxes, and if someone sued us because they were upset about delivery or miscommunication, we wouldn't want them going after us personally. That's the whole point of the corporate shield, is that there's many people involved and they're not individually liable for something that like someone else in the group maybe does. So the main reasons were, limited liability, I would say was in the background, but the main thing was actually to get paid by corporations, they want you to be a corporation. So there was a limit to how much we could grow just going off of like crypto grants from like small crypto community stuff, right? So if you do business with a C Corp or LLC or something, they want to sign a legal agreement with you and they want to invoice you and they need your business ID, they would need your mailing address, all these things for their accounting. And so the main thing was to be taken seriously by the world that we inhabit. We had to like wear the clothes of that world.
So it's an interesting metaphor, wearing the clothes of an external sort of power, so that they recognize you, something like this, right? But
Yep.
that also implies that the real you is something else. Do you find that incorporating as a legal structure is a tool, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's definitely a tool because we did it just so we could have these like affordances that a DAO doesn't have, like basically having a legal name and being able to sign a contract is just a big requirement for a lot of companies that want to pay someone. So but yeah, like you said, it's sort of like a cloak, like behind the scenes they don't have to know that it's a DAO, and that's the whole beauty of it, that we don't have to like put it in everyone's face like, oh, we're a DAO, it's so cool, it's smart contract based, the governance of the funds is all transparent, decentralized. We can just have that corporate veil and say, oh, hi, nice to meet you, we're dOrg LLC. And in the background, though, the way that we sign an agreement, rather than having like our CEO sign it as an authorized member, we don't have a CEO. So there's a proposal made to the DAO, and once the proposal passes, the agreement is considered like agreed to. So it's that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And so let's get into some of the more specifics about like which kind of entity to consider. So you mentioned LLC, which is a limited liability. There are others, right? Like cooperatives.
Vermont LLC.
Yeah. and
It's
then
like
S corps.
dOrg.
And so, what are the differences in the sort of legal structures, and what might people be wanting to think about when choosing one of those things?
Yeah, so I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal expert. I learned all of this for dOrg for figuring out the best path for us. So yeah, I learned a lot. Basically, there's C corps, which are your like traditional externally financed corporations, who want to raise money from angels or VCs or whatnot, are usually like Delaware C corps is a classic form. The problem with that for a DAO is that it comes with a lot of formalities around that are hard coded, you could say. Like you need a board, you need to have minutes every year, you need certain authorized persons and more complicated, let's say, tax requirements. And so our criteria were like zero admin overhead, like minimize admin overhead, minimize points of like control that could be had, like without DAO authorization, and say C corp cooperative statutes, like you said, were something we looked into a lot because at the end of the day, a DAO is a co-op. It really is. It's like a more sophisticated co-op because it doesn't have to be one person, one vote. It could be fluid. It could be dynamic. It could be share based. It can be work hour based or whatever you want to program. But anyways, I found that a lot of the cooperative statutes for different states were also very opinionated. They had an idea of what a co-op is, right? So it wasn't like ultimate programmability, choose your own governance. It was, oh, 2/3 of your members have to be American. Once a year you must report in this fashion to the blah blah blah. So basically, an LLC, I think it was invented in the 70s in Wisconsin, I believe, and the whole idea was to just remove a lot of that BS and to make it like choose your own governance. And so most LLC statutes, or at least in the popular LLC states like Wyoming, Nevada, Delaware, Vermont, basically let you define your own governance. So it's just, you just incorporate with the state. It's very basic stuff. It's like a one-page document that just says like your address and your name and stuff like that. And then after that, it's up to you, like what's behind the scenes. So you write an operating agreement, and there's norms for how those operating agreements look, and there's a couple requirements, but for the most part, you can put whatever you want in that operating agreement. So for example, in our operating agreement, it just basically says over and over in different ways, and this will be decided by the DAO, and this will be decided by the DAO, and only the DAO can do this. And yeah, one thing I should note that Christian brought up is that we specifically went with Vermont because they passed a special law called the blockchain-based LLC, and so their legislature explicitly said that your governance, operations, ownership shares can be tracked on a blockchain, and you have to say so in your incorporation documents, and then you're considered to have the status of a BBLLC. And so that's not what I've learned since then, is that's not strictly necessary. There's been, since we incorporated, people have done experiments elsewhere, like in Wyoming and Delaware, where they just in their operating agreement said, oh, we're going to be blockchain based, even though they weren't explicitly given that allowance by the legislature. And so the thing with Vermont is you just have that extra level of assurance that it'll hold up in court because the legislature ahead of time was like, we're creating this category, but it's definitely not necessary, but it's just an interesting kind of safety feature.
Yeah, I've seen a lot coming out of Wyoming specifically. Are they doing something similar with this blockchain-based company?
Yeah, definitely. They went a different approach. I think they moved before Vermont, but they went a different approach where they were more focused on tracking shares of companies on the blockchain and like allowing for that. And I think they were designing around the idea of an ICO. That's my understanding. Like that, I think that's their template, right? And I don't think they were thinking about DAOs. Although you could very much do, like I was saying, like choose your own governance, make a DAO based LLC structure in Wyoming. But yeah, the Vermont one was more like, if you read the laws, it was more just like, hey, you can govern your company on a blockchain. So it was more, we felt like DAO friendly, but who knows? The laws are changing all the time. I did this research like over a year ago now. So
when you consulted with, I assume you consulted with some attorneys about this information as well. Did they have anything to say about the admissibility of blockchain data as evidence, supposing you did have to get into litigation? And what did you learn about that?
Yeah, like we never talked about it in the context of evidence because the legislature did say explicitly you can do this. So I would assume
Okay.
if there was a dispute, we could be like, hey, look, this is our ownership register. It's at this address on Ethereum, and they would have to be cool with that. But there's definitely a lot of questions around practicality because of the like expert nature of anything blockchain right now.
Uh-huh.
That like, we'd have to have experts in the room, and the judge would have to have confidence that our experts are experts, and someone could say, oh, look, it's like this address on Rinkeby is actually the real thing, and he would have no idea what that means, like a test net. So there's huge like practical questions which we're only going to discover how they'll play out when court cases actually arise. But like we're just making a ton of assumptions right now and just trying to mitigate risk as much as possible in those
So you don't have a
assumptions.
ton of concerns about that from your, and I suppose that's largely because like most of the people in your group are concerted and working together to try and, okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. Avoid the conflict scenario, but have things set up so that if the worst happens and someone brings a claim, then yeah, everything's there. We've documented everything. Yeah.
Cool. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I remember I signed an agreement or something to that effect that was like everything goes to like private arbitration, and which kind of reduces costs for everybody, like because lawyers don't have to get involved.
Oh, I see. For
Yeah,
disputes,
exactly. So
internal
the lawyers
disputes.
we worked with drafted all these agreements that were like tailor made for, I guess, our DAO. And so yeah, one of the things was like private arbitration, because yeah, then just a private association or something could admit any evidence that people admit. We wouldn't have to like convince the court, which is just like a higher bar, and just more bureaucratic for any kind of like thing that they're not used to, I guess.
So one thing we've been thinking about over the last several weeks is sort of like, we know that there'll be money involved at some point. There'll be membership, and there's likely to be disagreements about who owns what and how it's all been kind of divvied out, right? And of course, we want to be thinking about it in a way that we can avoid conflict, or at least have processes in place for when that does happen. And just push it there, and that's where it goes, and that's how it gets resolved. But so what you're saying though, in your actual legal structure, it has conflict resolution sort of listed out on what that kind of looks like. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's definitely not ideal because what we would like is for everything to stay in Web3 land. So, if things like Claros and Aragon Court and other alternatives were more developed, there's nothing to stop us from throwing a clause into the agreement that Christian was talking about that says all arbitration that cannot be handled by the DAO will be pushed out to Claros or something. So we'd love to get to that point, but yeah, we did the best we could with kind of like,
I see.
okay, if something is really bad, yeah, go talk to people in suits.
Right.
Was
Okay.
there a case recently where like all was it like Autark and Aragon or something ended up having to go to like actual real court?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I think they had agreed to the agreement before Aragon Court was live, and so they agreed in a like traditional way in companies. And yeah, so they've been getting some flack for like going to real court to solve their dispute rather than using their Ethereum court,
Yeah, I mean,
which makes sense.
it
Have
yeah,
drama.
it is drama for sure, and I can see how. I mean, disclosure, right? Like, so I helped. I was there at the beginning with Aragon, so I helped them out with some stuff. So I just want to make sure any opinions are qualified. I was an advisor for Aragon, but yeah, it does seem sad that they couldn't use their own tools to do what they're supposed to do. But I also get that they're not ready, and there's
Yeah,
a lot at stake in this particular disagreement. Well, cool. And how long did this process take? You said you did a lot of research, probably talked to a lot of lawyers. Just give us some ballpark. Like, should we expect to spend 6 months of our time on this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I was of course also spending a lot of my time on the core operations, not just the legal. So it's not like I was like full time for this period on the legal question, but yeah, it's probably like 3 months, 2.5 months from start of like, okay, we want to get legit to, okay, here's the entity, it's formed. And a lot of that, like, it shouldn't take that much time really, but a lot of that was long back and forths with lawyers who we were teaching about DAOs and who were trying to custom tailor these agreements for a DAO, and then back and forths and explanations. And we open sourced all of those agreements. And so we hope that the months that we spent doing that can just, people can start with what we have at least.
Well, that's great. Well, I'll make sure to post a link in the description for this video to those documents, so anybody watching can go ahead and take a look. Did you guys take any actual contracts before legally incorporating, or did you wait in order to do that?
Yeah, it was like this timing thing where we had a couple on the docket right before we had incorporated, and so we waited with a couple, but mostly we were getting our funding before then from other DAOs, and so it hadn't been an issue. But yeah, some of these like more traditional or corporate agreements kind of had to wait.
Cool.
One of the things that we talk about a lot, well, not a lot, but one of the things that we've had sort of floating in this conversation for some time is conflict resolution internal to the structure. Did you and I suppose the answer is it will be organized by the DAO in the LLC documents, but can you tell me just a little bit about like what dOrg has in terms of conflict resolution and how you guys handle internal conflict, if there has been any amongst your members?
Yeah, like right now it's pretty crude. It's just like tyranny of the majority. So the DAO is reputation weighted voting, and if you have a dispute and the majority is not on your side, and then that's that. But if someone, like I was saying, if someone felt like that they were wronged, they could of course then take that to external arbitration and try to like force a judgment. But yeah, we do everything possible to kind of like keep it in the DAO. And then, like I said, best case is some of these tools like Aragon Court are ready. And then our secondary, second line of defense can be, okay, external Web3 arbitration.
When in the case of the tyranny of the majority thing, that's kind of where I'm thinking, like, before you have to go to those external parties, do you have like procedures for making sure that people are heard in a certain way, or like maybe these scenarios haven't come up too much yet, and hopefully they haven't, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, to be honest, they haven't come up, and the way we've tried to prevent them from coming up is we are humans who have like a very high frequency of communication and high bandwidth of communication with each other. So we have like weekly calls, tons of chats, a lot of discussion about proposals before they get made to the DAO. So processes have emerged just for like off-chain consensus to proceed on-chain finality, but they're not, I wouldn't say like formalized in like here's our handbook and here's the process if you're upset about something. Like we'll build those processes in if the need arises over time, but we didn't want to like overbuild our social consensus stuff.
And last question on that line, about how many people are there?
Yeah, so there's 20 rep holders right now, and I'd say the amount of like active workers at any one time varies between like 7 and 11, like something around there. So there's a couple people who are like, I would say 5 people who are like full-time. Their full-time pay comes from dOrg.
Cool.
But it's designed to be this like freelancer cooperative where people can come in and out. Like Christian, for example, came in for a couple months, worked on a client project, and then he has other stuff going on, and then now he's coming back and working on another client project. So that's the idea, that people can flow in and out, and if there's work and someone willing to work, then they can stay around full time.
Great, that's awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, what I noticed is like something that like kind of like simplifies a lot of things for dOrg is like they're kind of like a dev shop, and so it's like there's like a standard where like to pay for like operations and like maybe like build out some other things that like to dog food better and so on. Like there's like a a rate that's like taken for the DAO to use to like pay operations, pay like people for like finding a gig and so on, and like that's all like fair and reasonable, and so like it's like it is very low overhead, and it's not really like super explicitly like profit oriented, although it is like to an extent, but like its emphasis like feels to me to be more as like a vehicle for like contractors to come together and do work. And so like I feel like where maybe there might be some like additional complication, but not in like a I don't think this is bad. I think it's like further experimentation within the space that Dalton might come to is like thinking about like if it's like okay explicitly profit oriented, like how do shares work, how does it like get distributed amongst members and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely have, or at least I have in my head, a notion that members of Dalton would accumulate assets to build wealth over time, to have personal security as well as group security or sovereignty or sustainability, whatever that word is, as well as cash flow. That might come from several different places. It might be a different mix for different people. There could probably want to be different roles within the group. Some who have been more advanced in their career doing things like giving back to cash flow and to assets and to other things. And what they gain from that is, a sense of giving to something that matters, that kind of thing. Whereas people coming up or they have a different, they're willing to work really hard and learn, but they're not coming with much. And that's kind of the philosophy in general. But I am curious what you think, Ori, about sort of what we're sort of seeing. If you've seen some of the slogans like defund the police and that kind of thing, I feel like what we're doing in sort of these either distributed or decentralized organizations is of the same spirit, in the sense of we're not trying to fight the system. We're going and doing our own thing. I think the general spirit of defund the police is not literally to just take their money, but to try to reset that whole thing. But there's different ways you can go about that, right? Curious what you think, if the movement of decentralized organizations is growing in attention because of what's going on in the world, or is it just sort of we're getting lost in the mix?
Yeah, the way I think about it is they're very much aligned. Everything that's been going on for the past couple weeks and months, and the reaction to the corona response, to the police violence. And the difference is that the way I think about it is like if you have a problem with society, right, you can engage in negative critique and positive critique, and both are critical, right? So negative critique is saying defund the police, protests, all that's really necessary and great, I think, in my opinion. But negative critique is saying what's wrong with the system. Positive critique is forming alternatives that are better. And where I think they'll converge is that we're building the better, from first principles alternatives. We don't have any users currently, like really, it's like mostly the enthusiasts, hobbyists, developers who and investors who care about decentralized tech. But where it's really going to take off is once that negative critique that is exploding around the world right now, comes into contact and alliance really with those of us who have been in the trenches working on our positive critique for years now, right? The whole decentralization space has diagnosed the ills of our modern world and are working hard to build alternatives. We don't have as specific critiques, right? Like most of us aren't getting beaten in the street by police or, having issues with poverty. A lot of times, a lot of people in our space are highly paid developers. So the demographic disconnect is interesting, and I think it needs to like converge and be reconciled somewhere, because one can't continue without the other for too long.
I remember DAO Stack had like a sort of like pivot in the direction of like like they had that like basically like restyled alchemy and like React Native and so on, which I mean actually I thought was like a really good idea. Like it, you know, stripped out a lot of features, which like to make it simpler for people, and it kind of has like, you know, like the Facebook donation whatever type of thing, except it's like, you know, much less Facebook bullshit, whatever, you know, and more like, oh, you actually get are able to like put in money and like, you know, contribute and like put in your work and get paid to like do this activism stuff. Like, are you aware of them sort of maybe trying to take advantage of this situation or like heading in that direction? I mean, this is kind of like off topic, but
No, yeah, assuming the UX is there, I've seen the mock-ups and I'm aware of the development roadmap, but yeah, assuming it can be shipped and made user friendly enough, I think it's a total opportunity to catalyze kind of some of the activism that's already been going on. Because yeah, just another thought actually on that point. I've been really like interested and inspired by what I've been seeing with the protests, even before the George Floyd protests during COVID. There was like mutual aid groups popping up in tons of different cities, and they each, you know, I saw this one map of mutual aid in different cities in America, and you could click on a city in a map, and it'll take you to their like Google form, right? That's like, oh, join our mutual aid society, or take you to their GoFundMe and or their Slack page, right? So there was already these like small coordinated groups who were coordinating relief for, let's say, immunocompromised or, you know, pre-existing condition people to get people to run groceries for them and maybe help certain people pay their rent. So there was this like spontaneous, decentralized coordinating going on. And I was just thinking to myself, like, they need a DAO. Like, what's stopping so many people, I think, from giving to this, let's say, Brooklyn Mutual Aid Society thing is like, how do I know what happens to the money once I give it? And like, how can I watch like how it's being spent? And so yeah, if there was like little DAOs for each one of these like little neighborhood mutual aid societies, you know, ownership could be distributed amongst people in the community or donors or volunteers. And so I think like we're right there where it needs us, we need them, and we'll see what happens.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Ori. I really appreciate you coming on and giving us some really great information about your from dOrg, and Christian, thanks for inviting him. Yeah, you can feel free to stick around. I think I'll just go ahead and turn off the recording. We're just going to work on some membership stuff. But thanks everybody for joining, and see you next week.
Yeah, very much appreciated, Ori. That was very informative.
Yeah, awesome.